Okay, the people in the back, can you hear me clearly? Okay, good. Have you ever had a question in mind for so long that it becomes part of how you think? Maybe even part of how you are as a person? Well, I've had a question in my mind for many years, and that is, how can you speed up learning? Now, this is an interesting question because if you speed up learning, you can spend less time at school. And if you learn really fast, you probably wouldn't have to go to school at all. Now, when I was young, school I was sort of okay, but I found quiet. I found quiet often that school got in the way of learning, so I had this question in mind. How do you learn faster? And this began when I was very young, when I was 11 years old. I wrote a letter to researchers in the Soviet Union asking about hypnopedia. This is sleep learning, where you get a tape recorder, you put in beside your bed, and it turns on in the middle of the night when you are sleeping, and you are supposed to be learning from this. A good idea. Unfortunately, it doesn't work. But Hypnopedia did open the doors to research in other areas, and we have had incredible discoveries about learning. They begin with the first questions. I went on from there to become passionate about psychology, and I have been involved in psychology in many different ways for the rest of my life up until this point. I took myself to China and I decided that I was going to be a native level in Chinese inside 2 years. Now you need to understand that in everybody talk Chinese was really difficult, and a Western could study for 10 years or more and never really get very good at it. And I also went in with a different idea, which was taking all of conclusions from psychological research up to that point and applying them to the learning process. What was really cool was that in 6 months I was fluent in Mandarin Chinese, and it took a little bit longer to get up to native. But I looked around and I saw all these people from different countries struggling terribly with Chinese. I saw Chinese people struggling terribly to learn English and another language. And so my question got refined down to, how can you help a normal adult learn a new language quickly, easily, and effectively? Now, this is a really important question in today's world. We have massive challenges with environment. We have massive challenges with socialization, with wars, all sorts of things going on. And if we can communicate, we really going to have difficulty solving these problems. So we need to be able to speak each other's language. This is really important. The question then is, how do you do that? Well, it is actually really easy. You look around for people who can already do it. You look for situations where it's already working, and then you identify the principles and apply them. It is called modeling, and I have been looking at language learning and modeling language learning for about 15 to 20 years now. And my conclusions, my observation from this is that any adult can learn a second language to fluency inside 6 months. Now, when I say this, most people think I'm crazy. This is not impossible. So let me remind everybody of the history of human progress is all about expanding our limits. Everybody believed that running 1 mile in 4 minutes was impossible, and then Roger Bannister did it and from there it got shorter and shorter. 100 years ago, everybody believed that heavy stuff doesn't, except it does, and we all know this. How does heavy stuff fly? We recognize the material using principle that we have learned from observing nature, birds in this case. And today we have gone even farther. So you can fly a kite. You can buy one of these for a couple, $100. We now have cars in the world that fly, and there is different way to fly, which we have learned from circle. So all you need to do is copy what a flying squirrel does. Build a suit called a wingsuit, and off you go. You can fly like a squirrel. Now, a lot of people, I wouldn't say everybody, but a lot of people think they cannot draw. However, there are some key principles, 5 principles that you can apply to learning to draw, and you can actually learn to draw in 5 days. So if you draw like this, you learn these principles for 5 days and apply them, and after 5 days you can draw something like this. Now, I know this is true because that was my first drawing, and after 5 days of applying these principles, that was what I was led to do. I look at this and I went, wow, so that's how I look like when I'm concentrating so intensely that my brain is exploding. So anybody can learn to draw in 5 days, and in the same way, with the same logic, anybody can learn a second language in 6 months. How? There are 5 principles and 7 actions. There may be a few more, but these are absolutely core. And before I get into those, I just want to talk about 2 myths. I want to dispel 2 myths. The first is that you need talent. Let me tell you about Zoo. Zoo came from Australia, went to Holland, was trying to learn Dutch, struggling extremely a great deal, and finally people were saying, you are completely useless, you are not talented, give up, you are a waste of time, and she was very depressed. And then she came across these 5 principles. She moved to Brazil and she applied them, and in 6 months she was as fluent in Portuguese, so talent doesn't matter. But people also think that immersion is a new country is the way to learn a language, but look around Hong Kong, look at all the Westerners who's been here for 10 years, who don't speak a word of Chinese. Look at all the Chinese living in America, Britain, Australia, Canada, have been there 10, 20 years, and they don't speak any English. Immersion doesn't work. Why? Because a drowning man cannot learn to swim. When you don't speak English, speak a language, you're like a baby, and if you drop yourself into a context which is all adults talking about stuff over your head, you won't learn. So, what are the 5 principles that you need to pay attention to? First, the 4 words: attention, meaning, relevance, and memory. And that's connect in very important ways. Especially when you are talking about learning, come with me and a journey through a forest. You go on a walk through a forest and you see something like this. Little marks on a tree, maybe you pay attention, maybe you don't. You go another 50 meters and you see this, so you should be paying attention. Another 50 meters, if you haven't been paying attention, you see this, and at this point you are paying attention and you have just learned that this is important. It is relevant because it means this, and anything that is related and information related to your survival is stuff that you are going to pay attention to, and therefore you are going to remember it. It is related to your personal goals, then you are going to pay attention to it. It is relevant, you are going to remember it. So the first principle for learning a language is focus on language content that is relevant to you, which brings us to tools. We master tools by using tools, and we learn tools the fastest when they are relevant to us. So let me share a story. A keyboard is a tool. Typing Chinese a certain way, there are methods for this, there's a tool. I had a colleague many years ago who went to night school Thursday night, 2 hours each time practicing at home. She spent 9 months and she didn't learn to type Chinese, and one night we had a crisis. We had 48 hours to deliver a training manual in Chinese, and she got the job, and I can guarantee you in 48 hours she learned to type Chinese because it was relevant, it was meaningful, it was important. She was using a tools to create value. So the second principle for learning a language is to use your language as tool to communicate from day one, as a kid does. When I first arrived in China, I didn't speak a word of Chinese, and on my second week, I got to take a train ride overnight. I spent 8 hours sitting in the dining car talking to one of the guards on the train. He took an interest in me for some reason, and we just kid all night in Chinese, and he was drawing pictures and making movement with his hands and facial expressions, and page by page I understood more and more. But what was really cool was 2 weeks later, when people were talking Chinese around me, I was understanding some of this, and I hadn't even made any effort to learn that. What happened at absurd that night on the train, which brings us to the third. When you first understand the message, then you will acquire the language unconsciously, and this is really well documented now. It is sometimes called comprehensible input. There is 20 or 30 years of research on this. Stephen Krashen, a leader in the field, has published all sorts of these different studies, and this is just from one of them. The purple bar show the scores on different tests for language. The purple people were people who had learned by grammar and formal study. The green ones are the ones who learn by comprehensible input. So, comprehension works. Comprehension is key in language learning. Is not about accumulating lots of knowledge. In many ways, it's about psychological training. A woman I know from Taiwan did great in English at school. She got an A grade all the way to went through college. A grades went to the US and found. What you need to do is realize that everything you know is in image inside your mind. It is feelings. If you talk about fire, you can smell the smoke, you can hear the crackling, you can see the flames. So what you do is you go into the imagery and all of that memory, and you come out with another pathway. So I call it sandbox, different path. You come out of the pathway and you build it over time. You become more and more skilled at just connecting the new sounds to those images that you already have to the internal representation, and over time you even become naturally good at the process that become unconscious. So there are 5 principles that you need to work with, 7 action. If you do any of them, you are going to improve. And remember, these are things under your control as a learner. Do them all and you are going to be fluent in a second language in 6 months. Thank you. Okay, I think that's all for my explanations about how to learn language in 6 months. Sorry for my mistakes. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.